Welcome to the Savvy Ladies Wednesday Wisdom webinar. I'm Maggie Montemuro, and I'm the Marketing Manager at Savvy Ladies. If you have a question during the webinar, please type it into the chat box. And if you're joining us by phone, email your question to info@savvyladies.org. Today's presenter is Alyssa Gelbard, founder and president of Strategists Inc., a career consulting and personal branding firm. Alyssa is a sought-after expert on career advancement and personal branding. With a background in strategic marketing and branding, experience hiring and managing staff for the majority of her career, Alyssa brings a unique perspective to career consulting. Alyssa conducts presentations and workshops on a variety of career advancement topics for companies, professional associations, and nonprofits, and is also an adjunct professor in the Van Loan School of Professional Studies at Endicott College. Alyssa has been featured in Fast Company Inc., Huffington Post, and Forbes. Thanks for being with us today, Alyssa, and I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Thanks to Savvy Ladies. So to get started, as you mentioned, I am a career consultant, personal branding expert. So not surprisingly, I spend an awful lot of time working with people on interviewing. And I personally have been interviewing job candidates for the majority of my career. So I've sort of been on the other side of the desk. Resume Strategist, like you mentioned, is a career consulting and personal branding firm. And we basically help people market themselves to achieve their career goals across industries and job functions with a highly personalized and strategic approach. But the cornerstone of what we do is looking at things comprehensively and how you market yourself, and in-person marketing and how you interview is such an integral part. So that's what we're here to talk about today. So think about interviewing, this is interviewing 101. We don't have hours and hours. I could talk for hours and hours about this. So we're going to, we have a short amount of time. So there may be some things I missed, but I'm going to try to hit on the things that are really most important when you're thinking about preparing for an interview. And we'll break it down to prepare before the interview, then what to do during the interview itself, and then some guidance on what to do afterwards. So there's some key things to remember, though, about interviewing is that, you have one chance to make a first impression, and how you interview really reflects your personal brand. And preparation is important, and preparation when it comes to researching and rehearsing. And we'll get into some. And, confidence and interest is important. When you're interviewing, you actually have to act like you want the job and are qualified for it. And there is that 80-20% rule, though, that you hear, which is about 80% is, personal and cultural fit, with the interviewer and with the company, and then 20% are you qualified? Do you have the skills and experience? And at the end of the day, remember, you're interviewing them too. People, you hear that all the time, but you really are. You want to make sure that it's a place where you would like to be for, an indeterminate amount of time. So when we think about what does the company want to know, some of the questions that they're thinking about is, how can you help us? We have a need. How can you help? And that's what you want to show. And then what makes you unique? So why should we be choosing you over all of the other qualified candidates? What makes you stand out? And then what immediate impact can you make when we hire you? So, breaking it down now, thinking about before the interview, what are some things that you need to do? And we'll get into each of these things in some detail, but you want to do research beyond the obvious, beyond the basics. Practice responses to questions that you're going to get asked, and prepare questions that you should ask during the interview. And then also the ever important planning, how you're going to get there and what to wear. So let's talk a little bit about research, beyond the obvious. So of course you're going to have, via Googling and looking at the company site, et cetera, and social media, a good understanding of the company itself and its products or services, whatever they offer. But you also want to go deeper and look at the brand and the culture and the industry and competitors, and do something a little more thorough. When you're Googling a company, you don't want to just look at what's on the first page of results and that's it. Look deeper, look on multiple pages, look on news and video. Investigate the company's financial health. There's a lot of tools in which you can do that. And of course, if it's a private company or organization, it's a little harder. But the idea here is you want to dig beyond the basics. You want to walk into that interview knowing as much as you can about the company. Now, it's not just the company, it's also about the people. And LinkedIn is a great tool for that. And you can really find out a lot about the leadership, current and former employees by looking on LinkedIn, and trying to figure out hiring and retention trends by really spending time looking at a lot of profiles. But remember, everybody, when you are looking at, it's fine for someone to see that you looked at their profile before an interview, but don't reach out to connect before an interview. I recommend against that. But also don't just limit yourself to LinkedIn to looking about, at the leaders and employees. You can look on Twitter too. Even if it's a personal account, you can gain a little more insight into some of the people. And another vital tool when you're doing your research is your network, and not just people you're immediately connected to, but kind of one level out, and really trying to find out information and intel, as we say, about just the company and its leadership, but the person who's interviewing you, the department, the job. Maybe it's an industry that you're going into and you don't know a lot about. So really talk to people you know. But make sure, by the way, that when you're doing that these are people you can speak to in confidence. And, it could be current or former employees, a mentor, a customer, a client, former teacher. It can be a wide variety of people. And then it's also a good idea to just get a basic sense of the salary range if you can. And there's online tools like Glassdoor and PayScale and Salary.com, and look up that organization and also its competitors if you can. And again, it's a good time to use your network to see if you can find out just a range of what the salary might be. And recruiters can be a good source for that as well. So, before you even think about responses to questions, you've likely read the job description a bunch of times, before the interview, but really, really pay attention to the details there. Now, understanding that some job descriptions are super high level and you really can't get a good sense, and some have, 3 pages long and it seems like it's the job of a whole department, but kind of taking out the outliers, really pay attention to the job description and see how, looking at each requirement, how you can kind of address each one based on your experience, and think of specific examples that you can give whenever possible. So when you're thinking about responses to questions, practice out loud. It is so much different than when you do it in your head, because when you do it in your head, you tend to self-edit. When you do it out loud, people really, it's very different. And one of the things that I personally recommend to all of our clients is use a voice note on your phone. When you hear how your voice sounds when you're practicing questions, it's kind of a rude awakening, and then you can quickly delete it and practice, and it can really, really lead to improvements. Know why you're a good fit for not just the role, but for the company itself. You want to have an answer, and be able to really know why you want to work in the company. Why are you interested there? And the reason why that can be really important is very often, and this has happened to me many times when I've interviewed candidates, but it happens to colleagues all the time, is that when someone is really engaged and interested and excited about a company, sometimes if they're a little less qualified, they may get the offer versus someone who has, meets all of the requirements, but doesn't seem so engaged. An employer, a potential employer, wants to hire someone who really wants to be there. And you never want to say anything negative about any kind of job that you've had, a company or a boss. We all know this, but yet people still do this. And when we also want to be able to very clearly and easily explain your job transitions, why you went from one to another. Have it, be able to weave a story, and do it concisely. And if you have a gap, which so many of us do, don't dwell on it. If someone asks you directly about it, it's your insecurity, so you tend to focus on it, and then people often, kind of start to ramble because you're nervous about it. Just say what happened and move on. And for each, and also for each role that you've had, think about, good projects that you can speak to, challenges you faced, customers that you've worked with, and you want to tailor the examples whenever you can to that specific job or company or industry, if you can. It's not always possible. And, another really important thing is there are common questions that you're going to be asked at some point by somebody. And, there's a ton of lists online. Any one is good. There's so many questions that you can be asked, but there's some really common ones. And I think the most important one, which I can almost guarantee somebody's going to ask you it, is the tell me about yourself, where you weave a story of who you are. And when practicing that, you want to start to be able to customize that story based that the role that you're seeking, or the company or industry, whenever you can. Some other things to think about. Common questions that you'll likely be asked is something related to your strengths and weaknesses, and think about them kind of you overall, but also in relation to the job that you're applying to and that you're interviewing for. Thinking about challenges you've overcame, or a tough decision that you faced, or another very popular one is having an answer for why you want to leave your current job, and if you're in between, why you left your last one. And then things like, what are you most proud of? Why, like I mentioned, why you want to work here. I think all of those things are important, and there's many more too, but looking at those lists and familiarizing yourself, I think, can be really helpful. And this is something that over the years just really astounds me, that people don't prepare this well. So everything that you've included on your resume and your LinkedIn profile is fair game. So know the information that's there, and become really familiar with it. One of my biggest pet peeves as an interviewer is when you're doing an in-person interview, and someone's sitting across from you and you have their resume right next to you, and all of a sudden you ask a question and they kind of have that little bit of a stunned look and look down and kind of crane their neck to see, what did I put on that resume? So make sure you're really comfortable, and really knowledgeable about anything that you've put down there, including any kind of numbers or facts that you've put down. So thinking about some planning now, how are you going to get there? So before you, several days in advance, you want to confirm the details about the meeting. So reach out to your contact, whomever you've been coordinating with, and confirm the details. Where are you going? What floor? What time? And you want to plan your route accordingly, thinking of, figuring out, are you going to take the subway? Are you going to take a train, bus, walk, drive? And look to see if there's service interruptions in advance, because there may be some on the time when you're looking for the meeting. And also another good tool is Google can really help. So if you look, Google has, if you go under their directions and you put from where you are to where you're going, it will give you an estimated time. And granted, that's usually at that particular time when you're Googling. So if you're going during rush hour, you may want to add, but that can give you a good sense. And so whatever that time is, leave extra time. You never know what is going to happen on that day. And it's just not worth that extra stress, because you're going to be stressed already. It's also a good idea to check the weather. And is the tiniest percent of chance of precipitation, make sure you bring an umbrella. I think about times when I've interviewed, people who have come in and even though it wasn't raining too hard, they were wet. And, it can really be distracting. And you don't want to do anything that you can that's going to distract you at all. So your outfit, this is this is something that people spend a lot of time stressing over, understandably. So your appearance is a reflection of your personal brand, as we know, and people can form an impression of you pretty quickly when they see you. And there's research that, has anywhere from 1/10 of a second to 7 seconds for someone to get an impression of you. So you want to do some simple things that you can so you can avoid being judged negatively. And caring about your appearance sends a really positive message. And how you look, by the way, can also kind of be an indication of your cultural fit too. So, okay, so what are we going to wear? So you want to think about that several days before, in case it's, has a spot, so you want to pick something that's clean and wrinkle free. Importantly, something that's comfortable, that makes you feel good and confident. Everybody has that go-to outfit. And then also make sure that it's appropriate for the level of position that you're applying to and the industry and company type and geography. It's okay to maintain your style, but know who the audience is. So how you may dress for a creative agency may be different than how you'll dress for an investment bank or a startup, tech firm or a nonprofit. So just be thinking about your audience. And again, that's where your network can be helpful to kind of get a sense of what the environment is like. And when in doubt, in my opinion, always dressed up versus dressing down. Thanks to Mom, who told me that years ago. Some things to avoid wearing. So nothing too big or too small, nothing too short or low cut, of course. Avoid things that make you sweat. We tend to get nervous. A lot of people tend to get nervous when they sweat. So if something is going to make you sweat, don't wear it. And think about the weather too. If it's something really warm and the weather forecast is supposed to be warm, then maybe you want to wear something different. Think about the shoes that you're wearing for all you women out there. Wear heels you can walk in, and then thinking about accessories. So your jewelry, you don't want to wear something that's such a big statement piece that people can't help but just focus on that, or something that is loud, like bangles or a charm bracelet. And if you talk with your hands, then that can be really distracting. And then thinking about even down to other little details, like make sure if you're wearing nail polish, that it's not chipped, and that you're not wearing really crazy bright color. Understated is always best. Doesn't mean you can't be fashionable, but think about you're trying to make this good first impression here. And then one question I get asked all the time, and doesn't matter whether it's winter or summer, is can I wear boots if it's raining or if it's snowing? Yes, you can wear boots. Just make sure you bring a tote to put them in and that you change beforehand. You don't want to wear one of those, you want to bring with you one of those loud bags that will crinkle every time you move. So then comes the all important preparing questions to ask. So the way I think about it is, what do you really want to know? And then come up with a list of questions. And the type of questions that you ask depend on who's interviewing you. So is it someone from HR? Is it your potential boss or colleague? And it's okay to go into the interview with some questions written down on a piece of paper or on a pad. I would not suggest keeping them on your phone or an iPad or a laptop. That's just not quite the accepted norm yet. I think one day it will be, but right now it's not. And this, I have to say to everybody, if you get asked the question, do you have any questions? Please don't reply, you've pretty much answered everything, because there's no way that that person has. There's always something that you can ask. And, again, there's a lot of good lists online that have questions you can ask. But, you want to think about having a mix of questions about the company, maybe position-specific questions about performance, or maybe the company culture. But just a few, just to give you a taste, would be, one that I like to have is why did the person who had the position before me leave? Or if it's a new position, why was it created? Asking what the expectations are for the role within the first 60, 90, or 120 days. Asking how big the team that you'll either oversee or be a part of is. Another question that I think is good is if this is to a potential boss, is what keeps you up at night? What are your pain points? By asking that, at the end of the day, you want to be able to show that if you hire me, I can help you with these things and help reduce them or get rid of them. Another kind of related is, which competitor are you most concerned about? Another one, how and when will your performance be evaluated, is a good question to ask. And then let's just say for some bizarre chance you had a list of a bunch of questions and they really did answer all of them. A good one is to ask the person how they got to where they are today, or how long they've been, how did they get to the company, or how long have they been there? Because people do like to talk about themselves. So that's always a good one. But when it comes to thinking about things like benefits, I would advise against bringing it up first yourself. Let them bring it up first, the interviewer bringing it up first. However, if you've been through several rounds of interviews and it hasn't been brought up yet, then I think it's okay to ask. So, okay, so now we're leading up to right before the interview. What are some important things? Well, first of all, no matter what time of day, make sure you eat something, because when you eat, it'll help you be more alert. You don't have to have a huge meal, especially if it's early, but if you're used to having caffeine, make sure you have caffeine so you don't get that headache, and you don't want your stomach to growl either. But timing. So this is probably one of the most frequent questions I'm asked is, how early should I arrive? My philosophy is get there 10 minutes early, no more than that. But if you've actually left that extra time, that extra time, sorry, that I mentioned earlier, is go to a Starbucks nearby. If there's a lobby in the building, wait in the lobby. It's totally fine to do that, but you don't want to go so much earlier. And here's why. So let's say your interview is at 9 o'clock in the morning, and you get there at 8. And I may have had, or excuse me, 8:30, so a half hour early. May have had something planned for that half hour before, but now I know you're sitting out there waiting for me, and now I'm thrown off. So I think, a little bit early is advisable. Now, what if you're running late? Stuff happens sometimes. You could leave plenty of time and something totally unforeseen can happen. So you certainly want to let them know that you're running late. What I would advise is use the mode of communication that you've first done with your main contact. So if you've emailed first, but then follow up with a phone call just to make sure they got it. I would suggest only texting if that's been the primary way you've communicated with them, with your contact. But make sure you do at least 2 things, because you want, what if they were in a meeting and they didn't have a chance to check their email. So I would just recommend that. If we talk about arriving early, but if you are, when you're nervous, like we mentioned, some people sweat and really get excited and anxious. So by giving yourself that extra time, you can really calm yourself down, bring your body temperature down, so you go in with at least a little bit of a cool head. Because let's face it, everybody's going to be nervous before an interview, and if people tell you they're not, I don't believe them. There's always some element of nervousness. So if you tend to be the person who is a little more anxious than others, then give yourself even extra time. And if you did give yourself that extra time and went to Starbucks, great, but don't bring that cup of coffee in with you to the interview. Another kind of obvious one, but probably one of my biggest pet peeves and most interviewers' pet peeves, is phone and put it away. So don't have it on vibrate, because we can still hear the vibrating, and that's going to distract you. And any time you can minimize a distraction for yourself, forget about for the interviewer, but even just for yourself, is beneficial. And as you're kind of going in there, try to be positive. We all have that voice in our head that kind of talks us out of things, but if you start to think negatively, you're going to talk yourself out of consideration for the job. And they've indicated that the company's indicated that they're already interested in you because they want to interview you. So and very often, they want you to be the winner because they would like to end the process. And if they're someone who's on the recruiting and hiring side, they want to close that job requisition so they can get on to the next person. And if it's not, someone who's in the department, they want to fill this position so they can get back to doing their job. So they're not looking for you to fail. So try to stay positive and upbeat. And, don't forget to show your value before you go in there. It's not just about answering the questions or thinking about your insecurities, but you are valuable. Make sure you tell them that and communicate that. And also remember to really listen to the questions before answering. Sometimes we get so excited, we know the answer, we have a great response prepared, but they may be asking something else. So let someone finish, fully. And, do those deep couple breaths. So especially for, yoga breaths can be really helpful. They calm nerves. Just take a few deep breaths before you either go into the room or before you, start that phone call or a video interview. So now we're in it. Now the interview's starting. So now what? Well, if it's in person, have a nice firm handshake and make eye contact. And one of the key things during an interview is you want to show your personality and that you're, have an energy, and showing friendliness is okay. You want to be a person, but be very mindful of your nonverbal, communication, because that can be a key influencer to how someone kind of is thinking about you. Of course, there's the smiling and nodding, and that shows that you're friendly and warm and you're understanding what they're saying. it's a good idea to sit straight up. Don't slouch, because that kind of communicates that maybe a lack of confidence. And when people are nervous, they often cross their arms or look down. Don't do that. And don't look beyond the interviewer. Look at them in the eye. And if you're not so comfortable with looking people in the eye, practice that, because it really is important. And be aware of your nervous habits. If you run your hands through your hair or play with your watch or, fidget, just be aware of that, because you don't want to be distracting or communicate any kind of anxiety. Another thing you want to avoid is uptalk. So that can also kind of diminish a really good response. And what do I mean by uptalk? When your voice goes up at the end of a statement and you go like that, then you don't sound as confident. And unfortunately, women tend to do this an awful lot. Also key to, show your enthusiasm. Like I mentioned earlier, act like you want the job, because I want to hire, as the hiring manager, I want to hire someone who wants it, not just who's there to kind of check the boxes. Tough questions. So you're probably going to get some. So how do you want to handle them? Well, with confidence. What you don't want to give a tell, so you don't want to make a face or a heavy sigh, if you can. And it's okay to pause first before you respond. And if you don't understand the question, it's perfectly fine to ask the interviewer to repeat it or rephrase it. And if it's something, where you just don't have that qualification, try to transition the conversation to some, a similar skill or experience that you do have. And, if it's just a challenging question, answer it as best as you can. And, I'm sure many of you have heard about some of those crazy questions that some people get asked, especially in consulting and investment banking and a lot of the other finance areas, which is, things like, how many couches are in New York City, or how much does an airplane weigh? When interviewers ask crazy questions, they're doing so to see how you think and how you get to a solution. They're not so concerned with the actual answer there. And, again, if it's a tough question, no matter what, don't lie, and don't lie during any part of the interview for that matter, because it will always come back. And when we're, especially if it's a tough question, but just in general, when we're anxious or nervous, very often we might talk really fast or talk a lot or over-explain an answer, or possibly interrupt. And just, if you tend to do that, if you know that about yourself, just be aware of it. Because that can get very frustrating for an interview, especially if you're interrupting them, often. Another thing to do that can be helpful, because remember, you still want to make that personal contact, is and this can happen if you're sitting in someone's office. So of course you've looked the people up on LinkedIn before and done your research to see if you have any commonalities, but maybe they weren't on LinkedIn, or maybe they just had very basic information. Sometimes you can look around someone's office and find things to connect a little bit more on a personal level. Like maybe they have a picture of a dog on their desk, or maybe a Yankees mug, or a picture of them, crossing the finish line of a running race. You can try to connect at some point and try to weave that into the conversation, but make sure it's at an appropriate time. Often towards the end, that can be a little easier, but also don't overshare anything personal. So, all of this applies to all kinds of interviews. But then, we have phone interviews and video interviews, which are now so common. And in fact, phone interviews, most companies, they conduct their first rounds by phone these days. And no matter what kind it is, whether it's phone, video, or, you want to prepare for those the exact same way you would for an in-person interview, because they can both determine just as much as in person if you're going to move forward as a candidate. So of course you want to have your resume, the job description, pen and paper, glass of water, computer handy, in case you need anything. Now, if you are speaking to the interviewer by your cell phone, make sure you check reception in advance. Very often, if people are doing it after hours from a conference room or something like that in their office, sometimes reception isn't so great. So check that in advance. And try as best as you can to block out noise. So, if you're doing it from home, close windows, shut doors. Any kind of ambient noise can distract both you and the interviewer. And again, you want to minimize any kind of distraction you can have, because at the end of the day, you could be in the middle of a fantastic answer and then you just hear something and it throws you off, and then, there goes that answer. Same thing visually, minimize visual distractions. If you're the kind of person that's distracted easily, try to help yourself there. So like not facing a window, I call it the, oh, look, it's a squirrel kind of syndrome. I'm easily visually distracted. So if I know I'm doing something by phone or video and I am near a window, I'm turning around. And when you're thinking about how much time to allot for a phone interview, so let's say they tell you it should last between 30 and 45 minutes. Allow much more time than that. Why? Because, well, first, what if the conversation's going really well? But second, and this has become increasingly common, is if it goes well, they may say, hey, are you available to speak to so-and-so? And that could be your potential boss. So the last thing you want to do during a good conversation when they've indicated interest is say, sorry, I'm not available. So just try to block out extra time. You also want to sit in a chair. When you're sitting upright, your voice is projected in a much more strong way. So different than if you're sitting on a couch or a comfy chair or a bed or the floor. When you sit there, you tend to slouch, and then that affects the strength of your voice. Another thing that I like to do is be fully dressed and wear shoes. It sounds silly, but it just kind of can help just that last little bit. And this is just so important. Please silence your phone. I know this is something you'll hear me say over and over, but clearly it's something that still happens all the time and needs to be emphasized. So if you're speaking to somebody, if your interview is on your cell phone, turn it over and make sure it's not that it's completely silent, not on vibrate, because very often someone can hear it on the other end. And again, if you have it face up and you see that little, notification come across that, someone sent you a Facebook message or a LinkedIn or an email or a text, it can throw you off. So, okay, so that's phone. Now let's go to video interviewing. Again, same thing. You want to treat it as if it was in person. Of course, you want to dress as if it was in person. And again, it's about testing that technology before. Make sure you have a good Wi-Fi connection. Make sure if you're doing it by laptop, that your battery's charged and that you have a power cord ready in case something happens and the juice goes down quickly. Look at the background and lighting. So one of the things that I see so often, not just for video interviews, but when people are conducting webinars and all kinds of things, is they don't look at the background before. So do a test before. If you don't want someone to see, mounds of paper or leftover food or, a messy bookcase, laundry, those can be distracting. And they can impact, an interviewer's impression of you. The best backgrounds are, really solid light colored walls whenever you can. And if you have crazy, decorations on it, if you can remove it, that's helpful temporarily. Also look at lighting. See how you don't want to look too light or too dark. And, again, you can test how you look beforehand. And, this one's a really hard one. So looking at the camera. And not the interviewer's face, because you don't want to be looking down if you can help it. A friend once told me this years ago, and I think it's really helpful. If you have that tendency to look down, put a little Post-it note right next to the camera. And if it's on your laptop, that's super easy. And if it's on a computer, just stick it on top of it. You may want to tape it. It can really kind of help your eye to be a reminder to look up. Also be aware of body language. So I talk with my hands an incredible amount. And if I'm on video, it can really be magnified. So I have to be cognizant of that. And the same thing if you have nervous habits. So if you do, again, if you do that running your hands through your hair or, play with your watch or jewelry or twirl a pen, that can be magnified on the screen and can be a little bit annoying. And again, I'm going to say it again. Silence and turn your phone down, face down, but also remember to turn off alerts on your computer. So if you get a little alert every time you get an email, I suggest closing your email. I mean, I suggest closing every application you have except that video at that point. So then a couple things, now it's winding down, and what are some things you want to make sure that you do? ask the interviewer where they are in the hiring process and their time frame for a decision, and whether that means about the next round or an ultimate decision. And make sure you know who the final decision maker is and who's going to be following up with you. Of course, you want to thank the person for their time and ask for a business card. And then there's the ever important thank you email. It's a really good idea to send it within 24 hours, and make sure you personalize it. Even if you meet with multiple people, don't send a group email, and make sure you change it, because people share email. So you don't want to have the exact same thing that, that gets sent to everybody. And so what do you say in the thank you email? Well, of course, you want to thank the person for their time. You can briefly reiterate your interest in the role and in the company, and remind them maybe, or add a small detail to something, one or two things that really show you're a great fit for that role. And it's also an opportunity that, let's say that you had a response to a question that wasn't so great, or maybe you really messed it up. You could try to answer it here, but remember to be concise. And if you meet with someone more than once, make sure you send a thank you time. It could be short and sweet, but just make sure you do that. And you can always say something like, I look forward to continuing our conversation. So now the interview, it's over, you've sent your thank you, now what? Then there's the follow-up. So can you check in? Absolutely. If you haven't heard, you want to check in to show interest, but don't overdo it. You don't want to be, there's a delicate balance between, following up and staying in touch, but not overdoing it either. And one of the key things to think about is, okay, they said that they were going to make a decision by, let's say the end of the month, and it's well beyond that. What's happening? Well, getting a job is your number one priority here. But for the hiring manager or the person who's making the decision, there could be a lot of other things that come into play, like maybe they get thrown a major project or new client, or they're going on vacation, or there's a very brief hiring freeze, or maybe their boss has to make the ultimate decision and their boss is, delayed for a number of reasons. So sometimes it has nothing to do with you. So you want to be cognizant of that. Can you call if someone doesn't respond to emails? Absolutely. But be prepared to leave a a brief and clear message. Don't just call and then say, oh, well, I called and they weren't there. Make sure you leave a message. And if there are delays in this hiring process for whatever reason, try to use your network again to find out what's happening. Maybe they have insight into something. And this I really hate to say, but non-response in this whole process after interviewing is unfortunately this new normal, and it happens at every level. And after different rounds of interviews, it happens to people from early stage in their career up through C-suite, where they'll go through multiple rounds of interviews and then just never hear. I could talk about this forever and say how awful I think that is. I mean, it really doesn't take much effort to follow up with someone, but very unfortunately, that happens quite a lot. So, just kind of in wrapping up here. So you only have one chance to make a first impression here in the interview. So researching and preparing are really, really important. Showing your interest and your value are too. And make sure you really understand why you're a good fit. And very importantly, how you can help, how you can, hit the ground running. And don't forget at the end of the day to make sure that it's a good fit for you too, because you're making a professional change and you want to try as best as possible to make sure it's the right change for you. So now we're going to take some questions. So fire away.
Thanks, Alyssa. If you have a question now, you can use the chat box or email info@savvyladies.org. And one of the questions we had is, how long should my response be to the "tell me about yourself" question?
Oh, that's a good question. So, I mean, I think you want to have a nice, concise answer where you can, it also depends on how much experience you have. So if you've been working for 25 years, you don't want to get into detail of what you did early in your career. So you want to be able to weave a nice story of who you are and how you got to today, where you are today, but don't get into the details, but give enough of a taste to where you can kind of show a common theme throughout your career. For me, for example, branding has been, a common theme in my career since day one. So I would want to weave that into it. So I think, you don't want to be talking though for, 5-10 minutes straight, because that's again where you're getting nervous and you're just talking. But having a concise story of who you are can really be helpful. And by the way, you should be, having that kind of tell me about yourself prepared at sort of different lengths is super helpful for networking too. But that's a whole nother presentation.
Okay, thanks. And another question we have, well, a comment initially, great presentation and thank you. And then the question is, I know you suggested not to dwell on it, but could you speak a little more about how to address a gap in your resume? Specifically, I took a year off work to travel in 2016 and have had trouble smoothly refocusing on how I can add value to the company.
Well, I mean, when you're talking about it, the key thing about a gap in your resume and taking time off is you do not have to address it unless asked. So you don't want to offer that up. People understand that in this day and age, people get laid off all the time. It's hard to find somebody who hasn't been at some point, and hard to find somebody who doesn't have a gap in their resume. I think the key thing is when you took that time off, did you do any consulting? Did you do any volunteer work? Did you add any kind of certification or skills to, where you could kind of speak to if you had to, but you don't want to offer that up. I mean, if you take a year, there's so many reasons why someone could be off, taking a year off. So you don't have to kind of get ahead of it, but you just want to have a good answer. And, it's hard to give the answer without knowing what the job is and kind of what your background is. But I think you shouldn't offer that up unless you're asked.
Okay, thanks. The next question here is, there are times when you solely need a job and not much interest, but would like to work for them. How much should you fake your interest?
Well, people can see through it if you're being phony. If you really need the job, if you really need that job, of course everybody wants the perfect job, but if it's something where you really need it and that is the one that you want, then you have to act like you really want it, because people can see through that. And all of that extra stuff that you can do, that research and preparing that shows, that you're interested, can really, really help you with that.
All right, thanks. Another question, well, okay, so thank you for the information. And then the question is, how would it translate to actors in audition rooms? 5 minutes to make an impression.
I'm sorry, that got cut off for one moment. How would it make for actors and actresses?
In audition rooms where you have 3 to 5 minutes to make an impression.
Well, again, any of these responses have to do with who's your audience, who are you speaking to. So you have to make an impression, but what is the audition room for? What are you auditioning for, and who you're auditioning to? What is any time? Is it a musical? Is it a drama? So you want to weave, again. It's weaving any relevant experience you have. So let's say you are, they want you to talk about yourself, and it's from an open audition for a musical, then you want to focus on that. You don't want to discount your other background, but anytime you want to talk about anything relevant in your background to that.
Okay, thanks. Another question is, what if you go through the interview and decide you are not interested in the position or company?
Mm-hmm.
Should you still send a thank you note or avoid sending in order to extricate yourself from the running?
Oh my goodness, you should absolutely send a thank you note. Now, there's a couple different pieces to this answer. So you should always send a thank you note. I mean, they took the time to interview you. So absolutely. Now, here's the thing. So so here's the first part. So let's say you decide, yeah, this job is not for me, but you don't know that the person or people with whom you interviewed can be helpful in the future. They could recommend you for another opportunity that's maybe a better fit within the organization, or maybe a friend or colleague has an opportunity that may be a fit. I mean, that's part of networking, that that people can really, really help you with opportunities. So it's always in your best interest to put your best foot forward at any stage. Now, let's say you've gone through and they respond. You can then say, if you don't want to waste their time, you could also say that, after consideration, that you don't think it's the right fit. I think it depends also, but saying that depends on where you are in the process, because let's say you met with someone in HR as your first round interview, and then you think you're not really interested in the opportunity, but is that really true? Do you want to wait to actually meet with someone who's in the role? I think it really depends on the situation, but if you've already met with someone who could be your potential boss and you've gone beyond like a basic screening and you're not interested, then I think it's very polite and the right thing to take yourself out of the running, because then you're not wasting their time. Because what if you were their number one candidate and they're thinking, yes, we found somebody perfect? You don't want to waste their time. So, but I would always send a thank you note.
Okay. Alyssa, do you have time for one more question?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, it's, what if one of the first interview questions from the interviewer is, what is the salary you're looking for? I come across this at job fairs or career fairs. What's the proper response?
So, there's a couple different ways to answer this. So the first is the interviewer a recruiter? And an external recruiter. So they're just kind of trying to get a sense of where you are. But I think, one of the key things here is you always try to get ahead of it and answer, and get them to say, the range for the position if you can, because, it's always, we always call it the salary dance. But I think that having an understanding of the range is really important, to know where you might fit, because if, it depends on also the situation. So if you're saying, I got to take anything at this point, that's a little harder. But, you want to also know your value. But you can also try to ask where they are. Again, you want to kind of put it on them, because you'd like to see where they are. Does this make sense for you? But have an understanding of the range. It can be really, really helpful. I'm not sure if I answered that question, to the best that I can there, but because salary is something, it's very tricky, because it depends on who's asking the question, and where you are in the process. You said if they ask at a job, where you are in the salary.
It said that she's come across this at job fairs and fairs, and just commented, thank you for answering that question.
Oh, you're welcome. I would, if it's at a job fair, so this is, really early, you should have an idea of the range of what you're looking for. But and that's based on the research that you're doing. So if you're going for, I could give any kind of example, an analyst role at a bank, or a marketing coordinator or something, and the types of organizations that you're interested in, and remember, in advance, if it's a job fair or career fair, the companies who are going to be there before, so you can do your research, whether it's looking at websites, talking to recruiter, talking to people in your network, anybody who can be of help, getting a sense of what the range is anyway. So then if they say, what are you looking for? And let's just say, I'm totally making this up. Let's say the range for the job can be $50,000 on the low end, 70 on the high end. And you say, let's say you say between 55 and 70, then they know you're realistic. But if you say, well, I'm looking to make, between 70 and 90, then you may be shooting too high. But you never want to shoot too low. And, for all you women out there, when it comes to salary negotiation, this is something I could speak for hours on. We're awful. Women are so bad at salary negotiation. So this is something that, I really feel strongly that don't undersell yourself. Because if you do and you get that job, you're going to spend so much time working your way back up to where you should have been anyway. But sorry, I could go off on that for a long time.
Okay. Well, those are the questions we have for now. So, Alyssa, did you just want to talk a little bit about this slide with, and we'll send this information out to everyone, but if you just want to.
Oh, sure. So a couple things, we're on Twitter, LinkedIn. We also have a newsletter that I think could be really helpful for everybody's got all kinds of information about career advancement, personal branding, and you can sign up for it. You can also check out, I can also send a link to the archive page that we have. And then I'm also giving you here, this is my email address. So, if you have other questions, please feel free to email me and ask. I know some people don't like to, ask questions in this kind of setting. So, definitely feel free to ask.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I just want to let you know that we had a lot of comments today about thanking you for all the tips, and even someone who's interviewing now, and it's been very helpful. So thank you for presenting today for us. It's been really great. And thanks to everyone who joined us and asked some amazing questions. And thanks again, Alyssa.
Great. Thanks, everybody. It's been great. Appreciate your joining.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.